Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is an important topic that I know is top of mind for a lot of organizations. It's one we've actually had a lot of internal debates for at CPI. I'm Kory Salem, president of CPI.Solutions, and we'll be having Kory present here in a few minutes. Couple quick housekeeping tips before we get started. First, we have a giveaway for both the live stream audience and the in-person. If you fill out the surveys, we will have a drawing at the end for a $25 Amazon gift card. So please feel free to give us your feedback on this event. We'll have a special drawing at the end of the event. A couple other things. We have a series of queued-in events here, and we're excited that you have joined us today here and online. And the purpose is really to empower and enrich business professionals and help make more informed, better technology decisions. We hope you walk away with something valuable. And I do want to give a shout out. These events are made possible by sponsors, and Avaya partnered with us to make this event possible today, and we're very grateful for them. And with that, we'll get over to the topic for Kory Salem to dig into. We appreciate you coming out today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Are we good? Yep, we are. Good morning again. Good morning both to everybody here and also to all the folks streaming online. Appreciate everybody taking the time to come out today. So the topic at hand, as Chris said, we're going to talk about this decision of cloud versus premise, and a lot of organizations are struggling with that today. Before we dive in, though, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself so you all can understand kind of the perspective I'm going to bring to this discussion today. I've been at CPI now for a little over 23 years. Always been in an operational kind of delivery role with CPI. So I sort of bring that mindset to this discussion. I learned early on in my career that setting good expectations with customers is absolutely paramount in having successful deployments and projects with customers. So you'll find that I'm not very sales-ish, I'm not very marketing-ish, I'm really about realities and setting good expectations. So that's really what I'm trying to bring to the table today. I hope that doesn't come off as anti-cloud. Nothing could be further from the truth. But I have observed recently that the term cloud has become such a buzzword that sales and marketing seems to have just really grabbed onto it. And the messaging out there on the internet is overwhelmingly extolling the virtues of cloud. It's always about, you know, the benefits, and they're real. But when you choose something like cloud, there's also it's a choice. And there's implications to that choice. So I want to show really both sides so that when you're making these decisions, you're making an informed decision. So with that, we'll get started. What are we going to cover today? First, I want to take just a few minutes to talk about the cloud. There's always been a little bit of confusion of really what is the cloud, and we've got kind of a broad audience here today, so I want to cover just some real basic definitions. Then I want to talk about what type of architecture best fits your business. Honestly, your business and the type of business that you run is just as important as the technology when making this decision. Then I want to go through probably one of the biggest, hot buttons about cloud are all the financial considerations of both cloud and premise. And then next I want to talk a little bit about this kind of a trade-off between having control over your phone system and having the ability to offload responsibility to somebody else. And it is pretty much exactly that. It's a little bit of a trade-off. And then lastly, I want to touch on the role of IT in cloud phone deployments. And I think there's a little misinformation around that topic, so I want to kind of bring the reality to that one too. Okay, so we're going to start with what really is the cloud. And I ran across this video when I was doing my research, thought it was pretty appropriate. Maybe. If the video is going to start.
Okay, it kept slipping my mind, and then the next thing I knew, it went up. It went up to the cloud.
And you can't get it down from the cloud?
Nobody understands the cloud. It's a mystery.
So that was just kind of silly, but it is somewhat of a mystery to certain people. It's been around for quite a bit now, and it's becoming more and more part of the vernacular. But really, I did find another video. It's only a couple minutes long. But this video, I would say, is a good example of the information that's out there. It's very much, talking about the virtues of the cloud, but it gives everybody a real quick background.
What's all the buzz about cloud computing? To get started, we need a busy person. Let's call her Sandy. Sandy not only wears awesome cowboy boots, she's the technology partner in a company. Medium size. 18 people in the US.
Oh, we're not even getting it, are we?
How about accounting, tax service? They need desks, chairs, computers.
Sorry, I noticed we're not streaming. It's worked earlier this morning. It never fails.
What's about cloud computing? To get started, we need a busy person.
Well,
Let's call her Sandy. Sandy, what's all the buzz about cloud computing? Cowboy boots.
I think we're going to just ignore Sandy for the moment. So the concept really was, it was going through basically, the benefits of cloud and how Sandy can offload responsibility to a cloud provider and make her life easier. And it's all very valid. I guess the point I was trying to make is it really doesn't talk about any of the other decision points that Sandy had to go through to make. And at the very end, they show an actual live picture of Sandy sitting at her desk doing all of her, cloud computing, and right behind her is a plain old business telephone. And so it kind of points out to me that telephones are slightly different, and you do need to think about them slightly different from standard cloud computing. So what really is the cloud? Gartner defines the cloud. This is a pretty good definition in my mind. I think Gartner is a great resource for business intelligence. I think they tend to use a little bit big words sometimes just to make themselves feel important, and you kind of have to pick apart their definitions. But I do think this is a pretty good one. I'm not really going to necessarily read it. You guys can read it yourself. But I think the two things that I would take away from the definition is cloud is always provided as a service, right? You're not buying anything. That's probably the biggest thing. You're consuming it and paying for it as you go. And that it typically is delivered over the internet. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that because not all offerings are the same. Some use the internet 100%, some use the internet partially, but there's always at least some component delivered over the internet. And as I was looking at this definition, I was thinking, what are some good examples of cloud systems? I mean, there's plenty of business systems that people are putting in place. But from the consumer standpoint, I think Netflix is probably one of the best examples of a cloud service that you pay monthly to stream your movies. And as I was thinking about it, I realized, they didn't even start out as a cloud service. How many people in the room, show of hands, started out with Netflix delivering DVDs by the mail? I completely forgot that they even did that. And as a matter of fact, I think they still do. Is anybody in the room still receiving physical DVDs? Interesting. So that shows you kind of the shift. The other piece of this that varies slightly is when you say cloud offerings are scalable and elastic. That's true. They all are scalable and elastic, but to what degree an offering is, it varies actually quite a bit. All right, so we're going to move on, talk a little bit about, these are 5 attributes of cloud that support outcomes, and this is from Gartner as well. And Gartner is very big on business outcomes, and this just really will fill out the definition a little bit for everybody. So first, cloud, it's service-based, meaning, and they say consumer concerns are abstracted from the provider. To me, what that really means is all you're worrying about is using the service. You don't have to worry about what I call the plumbing, everything that makes the service work. You're abstracted from that. The second attribute is what we had just kind of talked about. It's scalable and elastic. Really what that tends to mean at the business level is you can add and subtract users as you go pretty much at will. You don't have to be engaging with people and buying licenses and having things loaded or buying hardware. It's in your control. And the next major attribute is that their cloud offerings are shared to a certain extent. So they use basically a pool of resources that you share that helps with economies of scale and drives the cost down. And just like the scalable and elastic feature of cloud, this varies as well. Some offerings, really you share everything, and some offerings you share just parts of the infrastructure. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. The things that you share typically always are, once again, back to the plumbing, the telco lines, the virtual environments to run the applications, the connections to the internet, basically all of the kind of the underlying technology is always shared. So the next attribute, metered by use. I think that's kind of a funny sounding term, but really what it means is you're paying for it as you go. You're paying for it typically, as you use it. Typically it's per user per month, as opposed to a premise-based system where you're paying, essentially buying it up front. And there's metrics that they measure to decide how much you've used and how much you're going to pay. Oh, I did find one interesting note here that was, some of these systems are metered to the point, we ran across a CRM system the other day that had a really kind of unique feature where you could pay them just $5 to add a user for one day. So if you had some use where you just needed a couple people, you can just pay them $5 and add them just for the day, which that's how flexible some of these systems can get. And the last feature, we kind of touched on this too, internet technologies. And this one I found was a mouthful. Services are delivered through the use of internet identifiers, formats, and protocols. I'm not 100% sure what an internet identifier is, other than maybe the URLs you're using to access this stuff. But regardless, overall, you're using the internet to deliver the technologies. So I want to talk a little bit now about, this is something that it's not always obvious when you're looking at a cloud solution, but it's the difference between Generation 1 Cloud and Generation 2 Cloud. Cloud's been around for quite some time now. As a matter of fact, really before the term cloud, it was always called hosted, and it still kind of technically is. And Generation 1 Cloud really grew out of that hosted model. So really, Generation 1, there are applications that started with a server-based or a premise-based application that you would have in your environment. And it was developed to work within your environment. Then they basically decided, heck, we're going to move this to a hosted data center and provide it to consumers as a service. So it's the exact same software, or at least a version of the software, that's running in a hosted data center. And typically, these are deployed in virtual environments. And one key differentiator that you can always tell if it's a Gen 1 technology is you will have a dedicated instance of that software for your organization in the cloud. So they'll basically spin up a virtual server, and they'll be running it almost in the exact same manner as you would run it on your premise. They're just handling all the hosting and all the maintenance and everything of that application. But essentially, it's the exact same application. And that really is kind of the Gen 1 Cloud. And it's really how cloud started, but there are a lot of offers that are still Gen 1, and you'll see them when you're out there looking around. Oh yeah, the last thing is Gen 1 does share common infrastructure. Even though you may have your own dedicated virtual server, you're going to share the virtual host, you're going to share the networking, the internet pipes, and all those things. So there are economies of scale there. So now we'll move on to Gen 2 Cloud. Now these are applications that were designed and built for the cloud. They really never had a premise deployment in mind. One big differentiating factor is they are multi-tenant, meaning you're going to log into the same big application as everybody else. You don't have your own instance anywhere. Netflix is absolutely a Gen 2 cloud application. You don't have a version of Netflix waiting for you to log in somewhere. And a lot of the more modern cloud applications are Gen 2. And another differentiating factor is they're built in the more modern hosting platforms. The biggest one that you always hear about today is AWS, Amazon Web Services, but they can be in Google, they could be in Azure, and then there's a myriad of other providers out there that'll do this sort of hosting, but those are the big three names. And Gen 2 Cloud, if you're looking at a cloud solution and it's in one of these data centers, it's most likely a Gen 2 Cloud. So I wanted to cover a little bit the pros and cons of both Gen 1 and Gen 2. And if you notice, it's a little bit faint in the background, but I did intentionally put this slide up here. It's a picture of a sword that says that it cuts both ways. And I kind of want to emphasize that when you're choosing any of these things, cloud, premise, Gen 1, Gen 2, there's almost always a trade-off, and you won't necessarily hear about the trade-offs from the marketing material or from the sales pitch, but you ought to be aware of them. So here they are. We'll talk through these really quickly, but one of the big pros of a Gen 1 solution is that you can control the timing of software updates. You'll have your own dedicated instance. Some manufacturers will schedule it with you. Some manufacturers will give you a development instance you can test on before you actually say, yeah, we're good, go ahead and apply that software. But at very least, there's a process to apply the software to your environment. What's the con to that? Access to new features is a lot slower. You're going to have, standard kind of release cycles, and you have to wait for those release cycles to be applied to your instance to get those features. Now, another big pro is that it's established, stable software. Some of this software has been around for a very long time, been running out there, very well tested, and pretty well bulletproof. One of the cons of that you'll see is some of the software is starting to look a little old. You look at these modern applications and the cool GUIs, and then you look at this other cloud application and it looks like an old Microsoft database or something, and you're going, oh. But once again, the pro is that sucker's probably going to just run and run and run. And one of the last pro for Gen 1 is typically they're going to be deployed in geo-redundant data centers. If they're not, I would question the provider a little bit. If they're only in a single data center and that data center has problems, you're going to have problems. So typically they'll do, it can be anywhere, 2 different cities in the US, sometimes more than 2, but typically it's at least 2. Now the con to that really is that the redundancy may not be seamless. It really depends on how well managed that environment is. It may sound great to say we've got geo-redundant data centers, but you better make sure that when there is an issue in one that you're really going to seamlessly switch to the other one and not have hiccups or oops, that wasn't configured right for you to use that data center or whatever. It can be very seamless and very easy to use, or it can be really business impacting if it's not managed well. So we'll move on to Gen 2 pros and cons. Probably one of the first ones that comes to mind is that the multi-tenant environment of a Gen 2 application allows for rapid deployment of new features. The providers can, as they're developing new features, they're essentially instantaneous, well, not quite instantaneously, but they can deploy it across the entire application at once. There's no going to each virtual server and updating them and upgrading them. And typically what that means is they're coding features in a more agile fashion. The release cycles are usually much more rapid. Some of them will be releasing features weekly, depending on how fast how much resource they're putting towards their development efforts. Now there is a con to that. It sounds great, but when you realize when software is changing that often, it can absolutely cause confusion and disruption in your business. We had one cloud application that we were working with that deployed, this was a contact center application, and they deployed a feature called whisper tones one day, which I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but essentially it's, if you're an agent on the phone, before you pick up the call, it'll whisper in your ear where that caller is coming from or something about, so you can identify that caller. It's a pretty cool feature. Well, this application just turned it on one day. And we started getting calls, what's this thing talking in my ear? Agents were all confused. They didn't understand. And then quickly they rolled back the feature. And then we heard from those same agents that, wow, we kind of got used to that and we really liked it, and now they pulled it back. So there can be just a lot of confusion in these kind of continuous deployment models if you're not, really communicating very well. Another pro is that modern hosting platforms have multiple layers of redundancy. It goes beyond the just geo-redundant data centers. You can spend hours learning about AWS and how its redundancy works, but it's pretty significant. Now the real con to that is if they do have issues in those environments, boy, they affect really large populations of people all at once. Doesn't happen very often, but Netflix has gone down, and when it does, it just goes down for everybody. The last pro really is they're very flexible and scalable with little or no need to engage the provider. We kind of touched on that, but that is a huge benefit to a Gen 2 solution. Typically, as a user, you can control very easily your access to features and adding users and configurations and things that are a little bit harder to do in a Gen 1 platform. One con that wasn't an original or obvious to me right away, but we did run into this with customers, is that you have to self-regulate now or be prepared to deal with unplanned increases in cost. If you have admins now that have full access to add users, well, they all of a sudden add 10 users one month, you may not be aware of it. You may have been budgeting for less than that. All of a sudden, your monthly cost goes up and you don't know why. So that's really basically all the background around what is cloud and Gen 1 and Gen 2 clouds. And we're going to move on to really the next part of the presentation. And I find that this is something that not everybody spends a lot of time thinking about, but it's really important that you think about what type of business you have and how your business adopts technology when you're making a decision if cloud is right or not for you, or what type of cloud is right or not for you. And this is my personal observation, so these terms are my terms, but I've broken down businesses into this spectrum, and I put them in three basic buckets, but it is truly a spectrum. You could be anywhere along the spectrum or anywhere in between. As a matter of fact, our business actually, I think, has different departments that are in different buckets of this spectrum, which can be a real challenge. But we'll go through them here real quick. On this side of the spectrum, really are traditional businesses. These businesses tend to be very facility-oriented. They tend to be slower adopters of technology, and the employees tend to be very phone-centric. These are the people that absolutely have to have their message waiting light on their phone when they have a voicemail, and they get really upset if that light doesn't go off when they check their voicemail. Examples of traditional businesses: manufacturing. Some schools can be very traditional. Businesses like maybe an HVAC repair business. Those are all very traditional, very facility-based. So in the middle of the spectrum, I've coined these businesses as tech-aware, meaning you've consumed all the messaging that's out there and you are aware of technology and cloud and the benefits that it brings to your business. Your employees are curious about technology. But in this middle spectrum, and we see a lot of businesses that lack internal technical expertise, or they have some technical IT expertise, but they're way understaffed. They tend to outsource IT or components of IT. Typically, we'll see networking is very often outsourced in these companies. And you really do need help adopting technology. It's just not something that is part of your bag of tricks with your employee base. So then on the other end of the spectrum, I coined what's called progressive businesses. Now these are businesses where your employees are power users. They adopt software just because they like using it. They'll dig through and figure out how to use things. They'll go to help files. They'll find a lot of benefit from any new application you can bring to them. Typically, your workforce is mobile or can be mobile. You may have people working at home some. You may have complete virtual offices with people all over the country. But they find it very easy to work in a mobile fashion. And as opposed to the traditional businesses, these users typically will use a cell phone or a headset plugged into their computer as often as they will a desk phone. These are the people sometimes that'll question, why do I even need that phone on my desk? And that kind of goes hand in hand with the progressive nature of those businesses. So let's talk a little bit about what does that mean in making the decision. And this really is my personal opinion from my experience, but my opinion, a traditional business is not the best fit for a cloud system. It can work, it always can work. There's ways to make things work in every business. But essentially the reason I say it's not the best fit is it'll be a significant adjustment. And traditional businesses have really difficulty adopting new technology. When we start taking phones away or making phones work differently or expecting people to log into their computer client in order to change things on their phone, it can be a significant adjustment. So my advice, though, if you're a traditional business and you are looking at a cloud solution, is be sure to understand the implementation and services that go with that model, and make sure you understand the support model. What are you going to do when you have a problem? Who do you call? What sort of people are available to help you? Because you're probably going to need some help along the way. So for the tech-aware businesses, I think cloud can absolutely be a good fit. This one's kind of the middle of the road businesses. I would say my advice is you lean towards the cloud if the financial model makes a lot of sense for you, and we're going to get into that later. If it doesn't make sense to you, then it doesn't make sense. So I wouldn't lean that way. But my advice is, if you're outsourcing IT or if your IT staff is limited, consider either using a partner or using the manufacturer's professional services to help you deploy it, because it's not going to necessarily be natural for your users to adopt this stuff, and getting someone to help makes a lot of sense. So lastly, progressive companies. These companies, honestly, cloud is a natural fit. I don't know that I would consider anything but cloud for these type of customers or businesses. Employees will take full advantage of all the flexibilities and features. As a matter of fact, you'll probably get feedback that they really enjoy having access to these modern applications and apps on their cell phone and everything else. And honestly, some of these companies are so far along that you can really self-deploy one of these systems if you have people that are, have time to learn the applications. You can actually self-deploy. Well, now I had another video in here, so we might have to skip this one. But this is one consideration of cloud telephone systems that really is not apparent in other cloud systems, and that voice is a real-time protocol. And that may not be obvious to everybody, but you think about it a little bit. Voice, when you're talking with someone, it is a two-way conversation. When there are gaps in that conversation, it's noticed almost instantaneously. So, like I said, it's a bit different than other IT services. It's a real-time communication channel. If you're trying to or struggling with that concept, think about a phone call versus a web chat on a website. If you're chatting away with somebody and you hit send, and that takes an extra 5, 10, 20 seconds for that chat to get sent to the agent, and really no one's ever going to notice. I mean, you're used to kind of waiting for that agent to respond. You can actually probably go 4 or 5 minutes, but that might be a little long. But there's a significant delay is never going to be noticed. But if I'm talking to you on the telephone, and every time I say something, it either breaks up or it stops, or you can't hear me and I can't hear you, you notice within fractions of a second. So there is no tolerance for any delay in a real-time communication like voice. Now, I would say the benefits of cloud in the video that I really didn't get to show you are very applicable to non-real-time applications. CRM applications, email applications, anything that isn't real-time, they really are a phenomenal fit for those things. When you add the real-time component, you really need to think long and hard and make sure that your business can deal with any of the trade-offs to going to a cloud solution. Well, getting there. Okay. So historically, dedicated carrier connections are needed for real-time communications for voice. These are basically to allow that real-time traffic to occur with no delay. They're clocked. They're intended for that back and forth real-time communication. These are traditional telephone circuits like analog POTS lines, PRIs, T1s. There's also now modern SIP circuits, which a lot of customers are adopting, but those are still delivered over dedicated data connections with CIR, or committed information rate, so that you're going to get that voice in a timely manner. And circuits like MPLS, Metro Ethernet, those are used for SIP circuits today. A video I was going to show you was just a little quick example of what voice sounds like when it's having delays and problems. I think you've all probably heard it before, choppy on your cell phone. I just thought it'd be good for everyone to hear it and see what the consequences can be if you have an issue with a real-time communication. So that brings me to probably one of the more confusing aspects of this entire spectrum when you're considering it is phone calls over the internet. I did honestly struggle quite a bit with this part of this presentation. I started thinking, could I recommend to you to take your phone calls over the internet? And it's not a simple question to answer. So first and foremost, there are no guarantees of traffic over the internet. There never will be. The internet is just the internet. Now, does that mean calls won't work over the internet? No, they absolutely work. A lot of people are sending their phone calls over the internet today. In the past, voice traffic over the internet was really reserved for communication tools like Skype. Now, Skype is actually kind of a phone system now. But previous to that, it was just one-on-one chat with, coworkers or whatever. And people were more tolerant. It was always easy. You could communicate really quickly through your computer, but you knew you were using your computer, and if it got choppy or if it didn't work right, nobody really cared because it wasn't my phone call. And historically, really, that has not been good enough for mission-critical phone calls. It really has not. If you are, and this kind of goes back to your business, if phone calls to you mean money, if you miss a phone call, is it going to cost you money? Is it going to cause you disruption? Think long and hard about sending phone calls over the internet. Now, the part that really gave me a pause is that the technology is advancing rapidly to make phone calls over the internet more reliable. Now, back to the first point, they're never going to be guaranteed, but they are getting better and better and better. And to the point that it's getting hard to weigh, are they good enough yet? And I think in general, for many businesses, we're pretty much there. I would say if you have a contact center, which we do a lot of work with contact centers, I still can't recommend a contact center take their voice over the internet. I just don't feel personally like it's there yet, but it's getting better and better. One of the things that has really helped is the Opus codec. I don't want to get too technical in this presentation, but the Opus codec is allowing for real-time communication over the internet, and it's not static. It actually adjusts as the bandwidth goes down or it's seeing packet loss. It actually starts compressing itself, and then it will uncompress itself as it has more bandwidth. I've listened to examples of audio with 15% packet loss with the Opus codec, and they sound perfect. So it really has been a game changer, and a lot of the modern tools are using Opus. Now, big question. Is it good enough to run your business? I don't know that I can answer that question here, but my recommendation, really, if you're really seriously looking at a cloud-based solution and you're not sure and you're really struggling with this one, start with a trial. That's one of the most beautiful things about cloud solutions is you can just spin up a couple of users. Typically, you can sign up, you can get $25 a month and 4 or 5 users and give it a go. There's no better way to tell if it's going to work for you than to give it a shot. One of the other technologies, too, that I didn't really put in the slide that I've recently looked at that's helping this entire, this kind of reliability over the internet concept are SD-WAN, software-defined WANs, where you're actually taking and sending that audio stream out 2 different streams. And then it's going to come back. It takes hardware to do this. And it comes into the other hardware as 2 separate streams, and that hardware determines which stream is arriving soonest and it has the best quality. So you basically take 2 paths, which gives you more redundancy. Obviously, it's not guaranteed, but that to me, just logically, could really help affect voice quality over the internet. So I want to talk a little bit about 5 nines. That's kind of an old school term. It's an old telecom term. What it really means is it's in terms of reliability, 5 nines. It's 99.999% uptime. And the interesting thing is you don't see cloud providers talking about 5 nines very often anymore. So I wanted to ask a quick question here for you guys. Let's see why it's going on. How many of you in this room think that 99% uptime is good enough for a phone system? Show of hands. No. 1, 2, couple. How about 99.9? That's 0.1% of downtime. How many people think that's good? Couple. Okay, well, how about 99.99%? That's 1/100th of a percent. Couple more. How about 99.999, the full 5 nines? How many people think 5 nines are required for a phone system? Couple. Okay, so that's a pretty even distribution. Now, what I found when I started thinking about 5 nines, it's kind of abstract. I didn't really understand what really is the repercussion of each one of these, levels of 5 nines. This chart to me really opened my eyes. So, well, it starts out with 1 9, which is 90%. I don't think anybody feels that 90% uptime is sufficient. But if you look at that, that's over a month of downtime per year, which is really kind of crazy. But whoever thought 99% was good enough, well, it's pretty darn significant. You've got over 3.5 days of downtime every year. And that translates into 14 minutes per day over average. That's a lot of phone calls you can miss in 14 minutes every day. 99.9, you're getting a lot better. It's a little over a day, almost of downtime per year, under 45 minutes per month. But that's still 10 minutes a week or over a minute and a half a day. You can certainly lose some critical phone calls at that point. So 99.99, I think, is really, in my mind, almost the sweet spot. You're less than an hour a year, less than 5 minutes a month, and only 8.64 seconds per day, which is really minuscule. Of course, then you look at the gold standard, 99.999. There's almost no downtime. I mean, you're talking milliseconds per day, which is really what everybody traditionally has been shooting for. I would challenge you, though, if you are going to look at a cloud platform, ask, what's your uptime? What they do all track this. You might want to be a cautious consumer of the information they provide back. I've seen, when they consider down, they consider the entire application being down. Well, that doesn't happen that often, but boy, your access can be down, and you cannot be able to use it, and it can impact you, but they'll consider themselves still up. Personal example I had this weekend as I was putting this together. So I'm a big Netflix user. I use Netflix when I'm working out, and I watch The Arrow because it makes me forget about how much I hate running. So I'll sit in the basement and I'll watch The Arrow, and I was working out this weekend, and of course Netflix stopped about halfway through my workout. And I'm stumbling trying to hit buttons on my tablet to get it to restart, and it wouldn't restart, and I restarted my tablet, and it played for another couple of seconds, and it froze again. So I sat for 12 minutes running, staring at a frozen screen of The Arrow, getting more and more angry, and realized at the end, after I kind of cooled down and everything, Netflix was not down. I'm sure it was not down. I imagine actually other people in my house were probably streaming Netflix at the time, which could have been the reason why I was having issues. But the point is, there can be any number of reasons why Netflix is impacted. It can be your local internet. It can be your network at home. I think in my case, I have a cheap Android tablet I was using, and it wanted to update the application. I think that could have been it. But regardless, Netflix was up, but I certainly wasn't happy. So it's just something to bear in mind when you see these numbers of uptime. I would say what's more important than the numbers of uptime, if you're looking at a cloud solution, is to get reference customers to talk to. Nothing speaks more than to be able to have a conversation with someone that's using an application, find out what their experience has been. They may say, yeah, they're all wet. They say they're 99.99, but I was down for 4 hours this week. Or they may say it's wonderful. You don't have to worry about it at all. I would highly recommend looking at reference accounts. All right, so now we can move on to probably what a lot of people are more concerned about is what are the financial impacts of cloud versus premise. So here's a list. I'm going to go through these a little bit one at a time, but you've probably heard these before. So we'll start with the cloud side. Cloud, probably the biggest thing people think about is low upfront cost. It's almost no upfront cost depending on what you're choosing. There could be some hardware you're buying, could be some professional services, but it's very low upfront cost. You're going to have ongoing monthly fees that some of these providers will ask for you to sign annual contracts now. Some of them will allow you to go month to month. You may pay more month to month than you do annual, but they're ongoing monthly fees pretty much across the board. Like we said before, you have the flexibility to expand as needed. One of the bigger things to consider is your service costs are going to stay consistent over time. with taking into account any expansion. Once you're at that monthly level, you're at that monthly level. Telco costs for your phone lines may or may not be included. This is a big area that varies from offer to offer. I've seen there are some offers that it's 100% of your phone calls are included. I've seen some where you get 500 minutes per user per month. I've seen some where you pay for every call. And so it can have a big factor. Make sure you ask about the telco costs. Some cloud applications are going to require a dedicated connection, like a WAN connection to their environment. That's typically more the very large, more Gen 1 hosted applications, but a lot of some of them will require a wide area network connection, which is an additional cost. Professional services to deploy the solution may or may not be included. I've seen there are some applications that include it all. I would ask, what does that mean? How far are you going to take it? Some of them, they expect you to do it yourself. Some of them, it's a one-off. You have to get a quote to do it. And probably one of the biggest sales tactics or benefits around cloud is that the costs are going to be operational expenses, OpEx expenses, versus CapEx. And those that aren't really familiar with that, really what that means is you don't have to go to a capital budget planning kind of session to get a cloud application. You can just consider it a service, and I'm adding this service to my monthly bill, and it's however many dollars. In some organizations, that's much, much easier to get through the books than a capital expenditure. So let's talk a little bit about premise systems. The big difference here is pretty obvious. You're going to pay upfront for hardware and software and professional services. You have to purchase the system. And one thing that people, I think, aren't always paying attention to is you can finance premise systems. Leasing is a fine option. You're going to pay a little finance fee, but you don't necessarily have to have all that money sitting in the bank, but you do have to come up with a way to buy it up front. Premise systems are going to have much lower ongoing costs. You're going to pay for maintenance and some service, but as compared to cloud, the ongoing costs are far, far smaller. Expansions for premise systems typically are going to require something, either adding software or adding hardware. Unfortunately, typically you're not going to be able to do that on your own with a premise system. When premise systems, telco costs, they're ongoing. You're going to have your typical phone lines like you may today, and you have to pay those every month. And then, as opposed to cloud, premise systems are all capital expenses. And that, like I said, operating expenses is kind of a benefit of cloud. There are some organizations that do prefer capital expenses. I know we work with some utilities, and they want everything to be a capital expenditure because that's how they justify the rates they charge you for your utilities. So whenever they can, they want to buy stuff capitally, not operationally. So with those factors kind of in mind, I want to show a couple examples. These, I want to stress that there are a lot of variation in these examples. There's a lot of options, but I wanted you guys to get a flavor for what some of this stuff looks like. So first off, this is an example of an Avaya offering that really is a Gen2 Cloud offering. It's a multi-tenant. You can basically sign up for users and you can have them running in a couple hours. So we based it on 16 business users with a real basic, just I want phones and voicemail and basic services. If you do a year contract in this particular offer, you can get free phones. If you do 3 years, you get a better phone. They include unlimited local and long distance. Toll-free and international are not included. And at this level, you're $24.95 per month. You can get down to as low as 19, but you have to have a large number of users. So for this example of 16, you're at $24.95 per month. And this is 100% delivered over the internet. So as you can see, it's essentially $47.90 per month. And that's really just pretty much a static cost since you don't have to worry about phone lines. And they include the professional services. That's pretty much what you're going to get. You may need some additional services or something like that to get it running. But that's an example of a small Gentoo Cloud. And if you're curious about the offering, I did create a link here. You can peruse all of the various options there. So we're going to compare that to an Avaya premise, IP Office. Very similarly configured. 16 business users. the same 16 phones. We decided that typically with 16 users, 4 phone lines is probably sufficient. So the costs are in there for your 4 phone lines at $160 per month, and 4 voicemail ports. And we estimated labor, your install labor, and your annual support. So if you can look across that, you see that you have a pretty decent upfront cost, but then obviously the year 2, year 3 ongoing cost is far less. And you probably have all gone down to the bottom total. After 5 years, really, premise systems are almost always less expensive. So with that concept in mind, we thought let's look at a broader pool of examples. We're going to look at basically several different buckets of system sizes and just show you how it extrapolates out from a total cost of ownership perspective. So now this is a slightly different, and this is Avaya's Gen1 Cloud offering, which means it's the exact same software on a virtual server in their cloud. And they're configured similarly so that it's apples to apples. Both systems have the same number of telephones. We estimated line costs and things like that. So this is more just to give you an idea. And you can see in general, even at 5 years, the total cost of ownership for a premise system is almost always lower. At 10 years, it's significantly lower. If you look across, you got 16, 30. You can also see that as you get farther out into the higher phone counts, the delta gets bigger. So the bigger the system in general, the bigger difference in price between a premise and a cloud solution. So observations based on all of this: cloud is less expensive up front in the short term, almost always. There are maybe special offers and things and stuff. I mean, this is just in general across all. Premise is less expensive over time. I have yet to see an example where it's not. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get there to the tipping point when it's less expensive than cloud, but it's almost less expensive over time. It takes to get to the point that premise is, and there's lots of variables in these offers, honestly. My advice is you have to do the math. I know nobody likes to do the math. I know sales tries to make these things seem very, very simple. I don't know how many people have looked at a lot of these offers, but they almost all have these 3 tiles of pricing. And it's use your low end, middle, and high. And regardless of the technology, they all have these 3 tiles. And all you got to do is take that number times the number of people, and you're done. And I'm saying that's probably not 100% true. It's really trying to simplify things to make it really easy to consume. But if you want to know what your best value is, you need to do the math. And I would also say be wary of the easy button. And those tiled prices kind of are the easy button. I had an interesting discussion with a coworker of mine. He volunteers his time for a local non-for-profit. He does all of their networking. He does all of their phone system, their wireless. Not only does he does all the service work, he actually buys the equipment online, used, and provides it to them at no cost. It's a really great thing that he's doing for this organization. He got a call from the manager one day, all excited, saying, I just talked to this sales guy. We are going to save all kinds of money by going to the cloud. We're going to put our phone system in the cloud, and it's going to save us so much per month because cloud is just cheaper. And my coworker asked, so how much do you pay for your phone system today? Well, nothing. How much do you pay me to work on your phone system? Nothing. So essentially, there's absolutely no way they're going to save money because they don't pay anything for what they have today. But boy, that salesperson had him completely convinced that they were going to save money going to the cloud. So just be careful of the easy button is all I would say. So rounding up my second to the last topic, this is something that kind of hit me between the eyes one day talking to a customer. And I put my sword back up here because this is one of those things that cuts both ways. Do you want control over your phone system, really is the question. And most people you talk to, boy, they're so excited about not having to deal with maintenance and upgrades and power and HVAC. So that's typically what people are thinking about. It's one of the biggest advantages of moving to the cloud. Like I said, there's no hardware to worry about. There's no power. You still have like local phones maybe, but in general, you're offloading the responsibility for all of these things. You don't have to pay for upgrades and plan for them. Someone else is taking care of it. All awesome stuff. In order to get those advantages, you have to, what you're doing really is you're giving control to the service provider now, letting them take care of it for you, which it sounds great. They control the software. They control the infrastructure. It takes it off your plate, but the question I always have to ask is, what happens if they do a poor job? Who do you call? If they do like the one contact center that we talked about and all of a sudden you get features appearing to your agents and they didn't even know they were coming, who do you ask about that? What, are you going to get in queue with customer support with 10,000 other people with them telling you, we're on it, we're going to fix it, and then basically you sit here and you wait and you wait and you wait until they fix it. Now, back to my personal experience with Netflix, I started thinking, I have given up control over dealing with the video to Netflix. I love it. I don't have to deal with it. If I would have had a DVD and a DVD player sitting next to my treadmill, I guarantee you it would have played throughout my entire workout. But I was okay with, I really don't want to mess with that. I don't want to buy the DVDs. So I was okay with giving up that control. But I know that I did do that. So when you do give up control, just make sure you're aware that's what you're doing and you're okay with it. So the last thing I want to talk about is the role of IT in cloud. One thing you always hear is you don't need high-end IT people to do the cloud. And I say, I'm not so sure about that. It's always listed as a benefit to the cloud that you don't need IT involvement. Is this true for a phone system where you have real-time communication, you've got networking issues, you've got, things that you need to be thinking about? My opinion, absolutely not true. If someone is telling you that you need no IT at all for your cloud-based phone system, I think they're trying to hit the easy button. Now, what is true is the needs for IT are far less. It's far simpler. The infrastructure can be, mostly taking off your hands, but there's not zero need for IT. So the natural question, where is IT needed? One of the biggest is network infrastructure. If you have phones on site, they're going to plug into a network. They're going to have to be able to talk to the cloud-based systems. If you don't have someone that can make all that work, you could run into trouble. Quick story from internally when we were testing that Gen2 Avaya Cloud in our office. Kory Salem actually said what I suggested. He fired up a user. 2 hours later, he had a phone number ring into his PC. He had a client on his cell phone. He was up and running until he plugged that phone in. And it just sat there and spun. And then we call in IT and realize, first of all, there's a cabling problem. The jack hadn't been used before. It wasn't even fully terminated. Got that fixed, plugged it in. It got a little farther, but then it was having an error. Find out, we had to get IT involved. They had to look at the port. The port was configured to talk to a different phone system. So it was trying to register to a different phone system. At the end of the day, there's no way Chris was going to get that phone working on his own. The other thing would be tier 1 support. Who do you call when you have an issue? End users are not really wonderful at wanting to call the phone provider if they can't get logged into their client or they can't get to their voicemail. Typically, you're going to want someone in an IT or at least an IT admin role to field those questions. System administration, who's going to deal with the moves, adds, and changes, the new users? I mean, that's a lower level of IT, but someone has to do it. And the biggest thing really is internet planning and resiliency. You have to make sure that your internet is stable, redundant, has enough bandwidth. It's not that big of a deal, but someone has to be managing it. Interesting story from one of our customers, very, very large customer that has a cloud-first initiative. They're moving everything to the cloud, which a lot of people are doing. They're trying to deploy a cloud-based CRM, and we were involved a little bit with it. They're halfway through deploying it, and they put the entire project on hold because their internet bandwidth is completely consumed. You cannot even get logged into this application to test the configurations they're trying to deploy because IT was not consulted and did not plan for the bandwidth and the utilization for all these applications that are hitting their internet pipe. So it's definitely a factor. Well, that's the end of all of my content around cloud versus premise, but I wanted to have one small note for those of you that think you may need some help with all of this. If I've confused you or if you're drinking from a fire hose and there's just way too much for you to cover, we've put together a really simple consulting package if you want to engage us. It's just basically going through the process with you. If you're in the Indy metro area, we'll come out and spend a couple hours talking through all these factors, asking about your business, asking about your resources, and then we'll actually come back and we'll compile all of that and give you a written report of what we found and then what we would recommend. So if you do need help and all this is very confusing, feel free. You can reach out to me, reach out to Chris, or reach out to whoever your salespeople that are in contact with you. And I think that is the end of my presentation. So we got a couple minutes for questions and answers. Anybody have any questions?
Being in this field, obviously, for quite some time,
Mm-hmm.
CPI has, do you see a shift in the financial longevity as far as right now on-premise is cheaper long-term compared to cloud?
Yes.
Do you see a shift in that?
I have not seen it so far, honestly. I see actually it used to be almost like a dirty little secret that people didn't want to talk about it when they were selling cloud. Now even cloud providers are full on saying, yeah, cloud's going to be more expensive, but here's what you get, and it's true. You have to know what you're getting. In cloud, the flexibility around cloud, the offload of the responsibility, they're basically saying it's worth it. So I don't see, now I will say this, we have noticed a trend of, commoditization isn't the right term. The pricing is going down, and we're seeing the competition is driving the monthly pricing down for cloud systems. So as they go down, that delta gets, essentially what it means is you got to hold on to your premise system longer before you reach the tipping point. But that's probably my observations.
But they run forever.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they just do.
Other questions? Any?
When you're looking for a service provider and you talk about the 5 nines, do you just ask them that question, or how can you tell where the provider is when they?
Yeah, I think you need to ask
from a connectivity perspective.
Yeah, I think I would ask a very direct question about their reliability and uptime. What is your historic uptime and if they tell you that they can't answer that question, I would look for another provider really quickly because they should be tracking it. They may not tell you 5 nines, but they should have some indication of what they consider, and then you really, once again, kind of have to do the math and think about what does that really mean. That's why I always suggested talking to customers, because the real world, what you experience, can oftentimes vary from what you'll hear from the providers, honestly.
Yeah, and then we've seen some providers offer service level agreements, and then if you're down and you don't meet the SLA, then you get a discount on your monthly service for your
Good point.
cloud.
Now, my comment to that was this: I guess I'm a little jaded. What does down mean? If your internet's having problems and you can't log into the application, you're not down according to the provider. That's your problem. So their application has to be down usually for them to.
What about connection issues that aren't your internet problem?
It would depend on. I mean, if it's in their environment, absolutely, they would consider that an outage. If they're having a problem at the AWS level or to their. Now, if it's like if you have a private data network, it's an MPLS between you and them, that's yours as well. So it really depends on who owns that connection. If it's part of their service, then absolutely. If it's having a problem, they would admit that. I think we're at time. Do we want to take any more questions, or are we good?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Kory. And just a quick reminder for those online, feel free to take the survey and we'll have a drawing for you. And thank you for joining us today.